spring of 1803, Thomas Jefferson and Napoleon of France completed the details of the Louisiana Purchase. The single transaction added 800,000 square miles to the territory of the United States at a cost of just $2.50 per square mile. These vast lands had never been explored by white men. Jefferson was anxious to determine what he had purchased and assigned his boyhood friend, Captain Meriwether Lewis, to undertake an expedition to chart the territory. Jefferson chose his man carefully and well. Lewis was a superb leader. He was physically strong, wise in the ways of the wilderness, and had an inquisitiveness of mind and coolness under stress that served him well in the 2-year journey. Lewis, in turn, chose Second Lieutenant William Clark to accompany him. The two shared equal authority and were a perfect complement to each other. Jefferson wanted the explorers to bring back as much detailed information about the region as possible.
The object of your mission is to explore the Missouri River and such principal streams of it as, by its course and communication with the waters of the Pacific Ocean, whether the Columbia, Oregon, Colorado, or any other river, may offer the most direct and practicable water communication across the continent for the purpose of commerce.
The expedition was to be one of scientific discovery, covering the subjects of geography, sociology, botany, biology, archaeology, and climatology. From the start, Lewis and Clark, as well as 7 of the other men in their party, kept journals and recorded every detail of what they saw and of the occurrences of the journey. These journals provide an extremely personal record of one of the most exciting and productive adventures in history. They recorded 200 species of plants unknown before the expedition, as well as 122 species and subspecies of birds and animals. They encountered 50 different tribes along the way, from the warlike Sioux along the Missouri to the Chinooks of the Oregon coast. Throughout the journey, Lewis and Clark were careful to visit the more important chiefs and to respect the customs of the tribes. The expedition got underway on May 21st, 1804, leaving from St. Charles, Missouri. There were 29 men in the party. They were to travel in a 55-foot keel boat and 2 smaller boats called pirogues. These were packed with a huge quantity of supplies: 7 bales of clothing, tools, medical supplies, 14 bales of Indian trade goods, and 6 tons of food. Their weapons included 2 swivel cannon mounted on the keel boat, 15 Harper's Ferry rifles, 24 pipe tomahawks, 24 large knives, and a patented air gun belonging to Lewis, which was mainly intended to impress the Indians. After leaving St. Charles, the party made good progress for the first several weeks. Managing 15 miles a day against the swift current, they occasionally used their sails, but more often relied on poles, oars, or the tow lines.
June 17th, Sunday, 1804. Cloudy morning, wind from southeast. We set out early and proceeded on 1 mile and came to make oars and repair our cable and tow rope. George Drewer, our hunter, and 1 man came in with 2 deer and a bear. The party is afflicted with boils, and several have the dysentery, which I contribute to the water. The ticks and mosquitoes are very troublesome.
After 69 days and 600 miles, on July 21st, the expedition encountered its first Indian tribe, the Otos. Lewis and Clark each made speeches, telling the chiefs they were no longer the subjects of France or Spain, but of the President, who is now your only great father. Drewer translated the speeches into sign language, which all Plains Indians understood. The captains passed out gifts, and the chiefs responded in a friendly way. The Otos would cause the expedition no trouble.
20th August, Monday, 1804. Sergeant Floyd died with a great deal of composure. Before his death, he said to me, "I'm going away and want you to write me a letter." We buried him on top of the bluff, 1/2 mile below a small river to which we gave his name.
Floyd was the first U.S. soldier to die west of the Mississippi, and the only member of the expedition to lose his life during the entire journey. On September 5th, the party saw its first antelope. The journal recorded,
"As they are watchful and extremely quick of sight and their sense of smell very acute, it is almost impossible to approach them within gunshot. Their flight along the ridge before me appeared rather the rapid flight of birds than the motion of quadrupeds."
Meat was the primary food of the expedition, and their group included several excellent hunters. At this time, game was plentiful in most parts of the West, and the success of the hunters was notable. On September 6th, John Coulter bagged 1 elk, 3 deer, 1 wolf, 5 turkeys, 1 goose, 1 beaver, and 1 buffalo. There was no waste. Each man ate 7 or 8 pounds of meat at a meal when it was available. After a huge meal at the end of the day, the men relaxed and danced to the music of Peter Cruzat's violin. Cruzat played for the men throughout the whole journey, and Lewis remarked that he played extremely well. The expedition had been warned that the Sioux had barred the upper Missouri to all traffic, and now they were approaching their territory. They were concerned that there might be a fight, and Jefferson had told them that
"If a superior force should be arrayed against your passage and inflexibly determined to arrest it, you must decline its further pursuit and return."
On September 25th, they met the Sioux. There were several hundred of them, more than 10 times the number of the Corps of Discovery. Lewis and Clark came ashore and began their meeting with the chiefs. After several threatening incidents, the Sioux decided to let the party pass. Next, the party encountered the Arikararis, a tribe that traveled the Missouri in bull boats made of buffalo hide. The expedition spent several days with the Arikaras. During that time, they discovered that the tribe had never seen a black man. They were fascinated by York. York, taking full advantage of the situation, performed great feats of strength and roared like a bull, making himself as intimidating as possible. After leaving the Arikaras, the Corps continued up the river into what is now North Dakota. It was mid-October, and the temperature dropped to below freezing at night. There was ice on the riverbank in the morning, and the captains began to think about a winter camp. The Mandan were the largest tribe of Indians in the West in 1804. 4,000 inhabitants lived in 5 separate villages. The Mandan were a highly intelligent and skilled tribe, and most importantly for the expedition, they liked white people. Lewis and Clark held a great council with the Mandan chiefs, and a few days later decided to begin building their winter headquarters. Fort Mandan was finished by mid-December. Earlier that month, the temperature was reported by Clark at 38 degrees below zero. The men had gained shelter just in time. It was so cold that winter that when hunters did go out, they often returned with frostbitten feet and fingers. While they waited for spring, they hired a French trapper, Charbonneau, as an interpreter. He had 2 wives, which he had purchased from a tribe called the Minnetarees. One, a 17-year-old named Sacagawea, or Bird Woman, was pregnant and gave birth to a baby boy on February 11th, 1805. She was a Shoshone, captured by the Minnetarees. The Shoshone were a tribe which lived at the foot of the Rockies and had excellent horses. Lewis and Clark knew that they would need horses to cross the mountains, and so they were persuaded by Charbonneau to bring Sacagawea and her 2-month-old baby along when they broke camp in the spring. Toward the end of March, the ice began to break up in the Missouri River, and the men pressed on with their journey. The keel boat was too large to continue upriver, so it was sent back with a temporary detachment of soldiers, the captain's field notes, plant specimens, Indian artifacts, a prairie dog, a prairie hen, and 4 magpies for President Jefferson.
Fort Mandan, April 7th, 1805. The party are in excellent health and spirits, zealously attached to the enterprise and anxious to proceed. Not a whisper or murmur of discontent to be heard among them, but all act in unison and with the most perfect harmony.
The expedition traveled from here in 2 pirogues and 6 dugout canoes. The land along the river was lush with spring grass, and there was a great profusion of game.
April 25, 1805. The whole face of the country was covered with herds of buffalo, elk, and antelopes. Deer are also abundant, but keep to themselves, more concealed in the woodland. The buffalo, elk, and antelope are so gentle that we pass near them while feeding, without appearing to excite any alarm among them.
They also encountered a silver-tipped grizzly bear, the most powerful and dangerous animal on the continent of North America. On June 2nd, 1805, the party came to a major fork in the Missouri. The information that they had gathered from the Indians did not indicate that there was a fork here, so they were surprised and confused. This was a major problem.
Lewis, June 3, 1805. To mistake the stream at this period of the season, and then be obliged to return and take the other stream, would not only lose us the whole of this season, but would probably so dishearten the party that it might defeat the expedition altogether.
All the men thought that the northern branch was the Missouri. It was muddy and looked like the stream they had been following. Lewis and Clark thought otherwise. The other branch was clear and ran over a rocky bed. The Missouri had its source in the mountains, and mountain rivers characteristically are clear and rocky. They made a 4-day reconnaissance up both streams, which seemed to confirm the captain's reasoning. They set off following the southeast branch.
A roaring too tremendous to be mistaken for any cause short of the great falls of the Missouri. Here I arrived about 12 o'clock, having traveled by estimate about 15 miles. I hurried down the hill, which was about 200 feet high and difficult of access, to gaze upon this sublimely grand spectacle, the grandest sight I have ever beheld.
The Great Falls proved the captain's right, but they were the worst obstacle encountered so far on the journey. It took the expedition 1 month to get around the falls. Dragging the boats and supplies 18 miles overland on makeshift wagons was torture in the July heat. Many of the people in the party were near exhaustion. Sacagawea fell ill and nearly died. On July 4th, they reached the last day of the portage, and in spite of all the obstacles, everyone in the party had survived. After 10 days of rest, the expedition set out once again on the Missouri. Lewis led the boats, and Clark went overland with 3 men to scout the country and try to make contact with the Indians. On July 22nd, Sacagawea saw a familiar landmark and said that they were approaching the 3 forks of the Missouri. She was right. Here, the Missouri breaks up into 3 smaller rivers. Lewis and Clark named them Gallatin, the Madison, and the Jefferson, in honor of the Secretary of the Treasury, the Secretary of State, and the President. On August 12th, Lewis and his scouting party arrived at the Continental Divide, the point at which all water to the east flows into the Atlantic, and to the west flows into the Pacific. A short time later, they encountered the Shoshone Indians. In fact, the very tribe that Sacagawea had been captured from 5 years earlier. Her brother was now its chief. The Indians told them that there was no navigable water route to the Pacific, and that they would have to go overland through the mountains. The Shoshone were able to provide horses for the party and their baggage. The trip through the mountains was exceedingly difficult. The forest was dense and the trails steep. They encountered rain and hail and snow, but they continued on.
Monday, September 16, 1805. Last night, about 12 o'clock, it began to snow. We renewed our march early, though the morning was very disagreeable, and proceeded over the most terrible mountains I have ever beheld. It continued snowing until 3 o'clock p.m. The snow fell so thick and the day was so dark that a person could not see a distance of 200 yards. In the night and during the day, the snow fell 10 inches deep.
The party split up, with Clark going ahead with the best hunters to try to find game. On September 22nd, Lewis caught up with Clark, who had found the Nez Perce Indians and had been given gifts of dried salmon and bread. They had made it through the mountains, and now with the help of the Nez Perce, they made 5 dugout canoes that would carry them down the Clearwater River to the Snake, to the Columbia, and finally all the way to the Pacific Ocean. Once on the river, they traveled 3 times as fast as they had coming up the Missouri. They passed the last rapids of the Columbia on November 2nd. The Columbia grew wider until it reached a width of 15 miles in Gray's Bay. They thought they had reached the Pacific, but they still had 16 miles to go. Finally, on Friday, November 15th, 1805, they reached the Pacific.
As the tide was coming in and the seas became very high immediately from the ocean, immediately facing us, I landed and formed a camp on the highest spot I could find, between the height of the tides and the slashers in a small bottom. This, I could plainly see, would be the extent of our journey by water.
The expedition had reached the Pacific Ocean, and the country had been explored from shore to shore. The men established a winter camp and called it Fort Clatsop, after the Clatsop Indians who lived in the area. It was a miserable, cold, rainy winter. The men hunted elk in the forest and made salt from seawater. They tanned the elk skins and made moccasins for the return journey. The captains worked on their field notes. In the spring, Lewis and Clark presented the fort to Camelwool, one of the Clatsop chiefs who had helped them throughout the winter. On March 23, 1806, they began their return journey. The men had left caches of food and supplies along the way and drew on these on their return. Game was once again plentiful, and they were headed downriver, so the painful towing of the boats was over. On September 20th, 1806, the party sighted its first signs of civilization, some cows grazing on the banks of the Missouri. On the 21st, they reached St. Charles.
Clark, Sunday, 21st September, 1806. At 4 p.m. we arrived in sight of St. Charles. The party rejoiced at the sight of this hospitable village, and we soon arrived opposite the town. Gas, 23 September 1806. Anxious to reach St. Louis, where, without any important occurrence, we arrived on the 23rd and were received with great kindness and marks of friendship by the inhabitants, after an absence of 2 years, 4 months, and 10 days.
The journey was over. The first Americans to explore the continent all the way to the Pacific Ocean had arrived home.